Okay, we're going to start. And again, I just want to say a big thank you to the people who spoke before the break. All of you did such a fantastic job and really got us off to a great start to our afternoon. So thank you again to all of you. So welcome to the second session. Welcome back if you were with us this morning, or welcome now if you're just joining us. We are going to hear this afternoon from 3 additional grantees. These are all Fulbright National Science Foundation Arctic research grantees. We have, for those of you who don't know, a fairly impressive Arctic program at Fulbright Iceland. And one of our main collaborators in Arctic grants is the National Science Foundation. And the 3 speakers who are going to speak this afternoon all are all grantees of that program. National Science Foundation works with Fulbright Iceland to bring US scholars and fellows to Iceland to conduct research, both in the natural and social sciences. Just with a spotlight on the Arctic. So we are going to start this afternoon with Meghan, who is a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh. And she's hosted by the University of Iceland, where she is looking at developing environmentally sustainable behavior in early childhood, a very important topic. I know she's been visiting schools, making friends, and generally having a great time here. So let's hear what Meghan has to say.
Okay. All right, so thank you to everyone in the room and on Facebook Live and on Zoom, and special thanks to Fulbright program, Fulbright Iceland, the NSF. As Belinda said, I'm here on an NSF grant, as well as my host institution, Ásgeirsdóttir, and the departments of education and psychology, and my mentors there as well, Freya and Kristen. Thank you all so much for making this possible at all. So my name is Meghan Orman, and I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Education, University of Pittsburgh. So I study psychology, but from an educational perspective. And I'm really excited to be here today to share a little bit about our project, Nature Connection and Environmentally Sustainable Behaviors in Early Childhood, and also, of course, about my personal time here. And I have a lot to say, and that shouldn't shock any of you. So I will try and move at a fairly reasonable pace. So I'm going to take you back first to spring 2022, sitting in my office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when I got the email that I had been selected for a Fulbright Award. And I can't even begin to describe the emotions that I felt that day, but that gratitude is something that I've tried to carry with me in the big and small moments in my time here in Iceland. And then immediately I got right to work thinking about our project, which is looking at nature connection and sustainable behaviors in young children. So what do I mean by this? Nature connection refers to our psychological connection with the natural world. So in this picture, we'd be interested in knowing what this child is thinking and feeling about the nature that they see, and how their thoughts and feelings influence their behaviors. Does it make them want to act more sustainably or to care for the nature? And obviously these are really important topics if we want to not only help children thrive, but the environment thrive as well. So I alluded to this a little bit, but why is this important? Well, accumulating evidence is beginning to show the benefits of nature and nature connection for our individual health and well-being. So not just the environment, but things like stress reduction, cognitive functioning, and emotional regulation. And then those benefits have cascading effects, which lead into social health. So development of empathy and caring for other people as well. And finally, it turns out that nature connection is a big piece of what motivates people to act in sustainable ways. So you can learn a lot about what it means to take care of the environment, but if you don't feel a personal connection to it, you're less likely to actually take the steps needed to act sustainably. So this is an important topic, but the issue is that we don't really know a lot about what nature connection looks like in young children or the factors associated with its development. So how then can we design educational programs and settings that best influence kids to connect with the natural world? We can't until we understand these things. So those were the two research questions that we focused on in my time here. What does young children's nature connection look like, and what factors are associated with its development? So this was split into 3 studies, which in total comprised my dissertation. So study 1 was looking at children's perspectives on nature connection. So for this, we had children draw themselves while doing something in nature, and we interviewed them about what they drew, sort of how it makes them feel, and what their thoughts and feelings about nature are. Very cute. Highly recommend including children as participants in your work if you can. The second study was methodological perspectives. And for this one, we developed a novel picture-based survey for children to take that would sort of give us insight to how they were thinking and feeling about the natural world in a quantitative way, and compared that with existing measures. And then study 3 was looking at factors associated with children's nature connections, specifically parent, teacher, and school level factors. Okay, so what did this actually look like? Well, I arrived here in fall 2022 and sort of got right to work, getting to know my mentors at Ásgeirsdóttir, getting all the measures ready. So we had to create all the measures and then translate them into Icelandic, which was quite a process. And then with the help of a wonderful research assistant, an undergrad student at Ásgeirsdóttir, we were actually able to pilot test all of our measures in this preschool. And pilot testing is so important for figuring out what works and what doesn't work, especially when you're working with kids. You really don't know how they're going to respond in all cases. So this was really important for us to do. And then in spring is when we actually got to do data collection. So this is me with my amazing research team. So this is my advisor, Kristen, Theriault here, and then the 7 undergraduate students who all helped with this project as part of their senior thesis. So I don't speak Icelandic, and they were the ones who actually went into the schools and collected all the data with the children. So this study would not have happened without their help and support. So I'm very grateful to them. Data collection in the schools, we actually interviewed all the kids individually, and that took place in February, March, and April, and then surveyed the teachers and the parents as well. Being in the schools was one of my favorite parts. So I wasn't with the children, but I could observe them. And this was a really cold, rainy day in February, and they're out sitting in puddles and playing in the rain. And it just gave me a deep insight and appreciation for what education looks like in preschools here in Iceland. I also proposed and passed my dissertation proposal in February. Woohoo, that was very exciting. Thanks to my wonderful community who all helped this project to get where it is. So as I said, we're just sort of finishing data collection, and I'm just starting to analyze the results. So I don't have any results from study 1 to show because it's all still in Icelandic. So hoping to get that translated. And this will give us, I think, a lot of insight into how kids are thinking about nature and feeling about it. So I'm really excited for that. One sort of unexpected finding came from study 2, where we're looking at methodological perspectives on nature connection. So this top picture here shows how children responded to the survey we gave them about their nature connection. And this bottom one is for the same sort of sample, but this is what parents reported their child's nature connection as being. So when I distributed these surveys, I expected them to match, right? I expected the parent ones to match the child ones. And as you can see, they don't. So the child one has this nice bell curve to it, and the parent report of their children's nature connection is skewed to the right. So there's something going on here, and it's not necessarily clear which perspective is most valid or accurate, and that's sort of what we're digging into now. Finally, we're looking at a lot of factors in relation to children's nature connection, so parent nature connection, teacher nature connection, a slew of other factors. But one finding I can share with you now is that we found no significant differences in children's nature connection across schools or teachers. And at first you might think, well, that just means all children everywhere are connected to nature sort of in the same way. But what else could be happening is that in Iceland, access to preschools is fairly universal, and they all follow the national preschool curriculum, which emphasizes nature and sustainability. So it could be that across classrooms and schools in Iceland, children are all demonstrating similar nature connection because of the work of this curriculum. So future studies will be needed to sort of tease that out. Of course, many challenges along the way, especially when you're working with kids in a foreign language. I can't even begin to tell you. First, getting all the measures ready in Icelandic. was a huge challenge, and I really relied heavily on the community support that was around me to get that done. So thank you to everyone who was involved with that. Now I have 105 interviews with children in Icelandic, wink, wink, Eric, trying to get those translated into English so I can actually analyze the data. So that's my current challenge. And then funding and navigating many small grants. But all of these came with their own rewards, like building better connections with the community, leaning on people for small pieces that add up to make a really big difference in the outcomes. In addition to my project, I was also welcomed into academic life here in Iceland. So many great opportunities came up, and from a former Fulbrighter who told me to just say yes to as many things as possible, that's what I tried to do here. So a few weeks ago, I got to give a keynote at an educational conference for science educators in Iceland. That was amazing. Last fall, I got to present at Arctic Circle Assembly with some of my fellow NSF grantees, made some great connections there, like Youth for Arctic Nature, an organization that I'll continue to work with even after I leave here. Lots of guest lectures, conference talks, research talks, all kinds of things. But both the education and the psychology departments here have really welcomed me in with open arms. I've been able to attend events from book releases to project celebrations to holiday parties to ugly Christmas sweater parties to all kinds of really, really wonderful activities. And I so appreciate the community that was given to me here. And finally, a shout out to my PhD writing group. So I met this group at Háskóli-Íslands, the School of Education here last fall. And we meet 3 times a week to sort of talk about our PhD work, motivate each other, and also just talk about life. So this has been a really great opportunity to network with other people in the School of Education here. And luckily, because of the time difference, I'll be able to continue joining them even after I go back to the US. Okay, that was a lot of work. But as Belinda said, I had a lot of fun here too. I did a lot, but these are some of the things in Reykjavik that I loved sort of the most. So the first is Asia. Asia is the mountain that you see if you're here in Reykjavik that sort of leans up against the city. And I got to see it every day. And every day it looked a little different. And I got to climb it twice, hopefully once more before I go. And I didn't know that someone could love a mountain as much as I have come to love Asia. She's just been such a force. The cats, as you will see. So I left my cat Tom back in the US and was really afraid I would just not see cats for 9 months. And I was pleasantly surprised when I got here that there were cats just everywhere. They all have homes, they're all well cared for. But this one likes to come to my door or my window for pets every day. So I definitely love the cats here. Ice cream. No one told me that Icelanders love ice cream as much as I do. So I was very excited to kind of discover the ice cream culture here. And I'm very passionate now about it being available year round. In Pittsburgh, we do this crazy thing where we close ice cream parlors in the winter. And I really don't see the point in that anymore. I know. So when I go back, I'm going to be petitioning them to stay open in the winter, please. The running and walking paths in Iceland are incredible. They're everywhere. This is the one by my house that I have ran hundreds of miles on. And every mile is a journey, and I just have been really thankful for that here. The pool culture, I knew I would love the hot pools here, but I didn't know how much I would actually love the pool culture and the cold pools and the saunas. This is my local pool in Vesterbar, which I go to at least once a week. I'm definitely going to miss that a lot. And finally, I've been able to attend a lot of sporting events and music events here. So I'm a big sports fan, big music fan. I got to see Björk do a DJ set, which was amazing. But I think seeing Sigur Rós last fall was that was a dream come true. So I've also been fortunate enough to have people that I love come here to visit me. So my friend Ashley came last fall and we just had the best time. This was us on Longyearbyen. And then family friends that sort of were passing through Iceland, like Sonia, I got to meet up with and just get hugs from home, which made a big difference. My dad and his wife, Julie, were able to come in March. And this was just the best trip. Not only did we have a great time, but I feel like we all walked away feeling closer to each other. And that was a really important thing for me. Also, I got to arrange a visit for my dad with the mayor of Reykjavik, Dagur, because my dad is the mayor of our village, Aurora, in upstate New York, where I'm from. So this was a proud daughter moment for me to witness. And then Ben is my partner and my rock. He has been in Pittsburgh this whole time, holding down the fort there for us. But he has come here 3 times to visit. He had never left the States before coming here. He's been here 3 times to visit. We've gone everywhere. We've done so much. And I'm just really thankful to have him on my side. Go Bills. Finally, and this is the one where I won't cry probably, but what has made my time so special here really is the people. So all my fellow Fulbrighters that I've gotten a chance to get to know, I just love and appreciate you all so much. So Bethany and Sydney and our runs. We also had a Sunday hiking group with some Fulbrighters and honorary member Bruce. Bruce and I are also big Bills fans. So we started a Buffalo Bills backers club of Iceland, unofficial. But we met for every game last fall, and it was really nice to welcome Bills fans who are traveling to Iceland on vacation to sort of greet them and give them an inside view as to like what it's like to live here, and offer them another perspective that they may have never had. Also, like, I don't have a picture of us, but Hecla, there you go, our family dog. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and the family. My friend Gutni, who I met early last year, she lives in Borganese, but she's just a rock star, and I'm really excited to see where her future takes her as well. But I really appreciate getting to know her. Then my mentors, Kristen, Freya, I see you on the call. Yeah, I don't really have enough words, but you all took me, a stranger, under your wing and gave me all the tools I needed to succeed here. I don't know how I could ever repay you, but I do hope to pay it forward to someone else in the future. Okay, so looking forward, yeah, I've had the best time here, but I'm really excited for what comes next. So I will go back to Pittsburgh this summer. I'm teaching at Pitt in the upcoming year and really excited to integrate what I've learned about early childhood education here into those courses. I will finish my dissertation. I will graduate in 1 year. So Dr. Orman is coming. Yeah, and I know that re-entry into the US will come with its challenges. So some of the ways I'm looking forward to working through those are by expanding my volunteer service in the US, joining the Pittsburgh Fulbright alumni group, joining a running club. Thank you, Sydney and Bethany. I'm so excited for that. And then just keep moving, exploring, and building bridges. So I want to end by just saying thank you to everyone on this list, but a special thank you to the Fulbright Iceland Commission Fulbright program for taking a chance on me. So I feel like this experience has given me the confidence and the tools that I need to succeed in my future. And I know that people always say confidence should come from within, but the truth is, like, it doesn't always happen that way. And sometimes you need someone on the outside to say, hey, you deserve a chance. And I feel like that's what you all have given me. So I'm super grateful for this opportunity. And for everyone on this list, I mentioned research challenges earlier, but personal challenges were also a thing here. And mental health is no joke. And everyone on this list has helped me get through this experience and not only get through it, but come out stronger on the other side. So thank you to everyone on this list. And with that, I conclude.
Okay.
Yo.
Let's get going with some questions. Yeah.
Can't speak enough on how much of a light Meghan is, and it's been so great to get to know you. Also, just a small comment on like how small Iceland is. In your slide about guest lecturing at one of your classes, one of the students I saw in there is a runner and
Oh, that is so great. I've seen him. Him, right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. That is so funny.
Do you feel that you got to revisit your child as a part of observing children and their development or an already developed?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I echo for those of you online, just wondering if I have revisited parts of my childhood through my research here with children in nature. And absolutely, it has forced me to look back and look at all those moments, like with, my parents and my family, and spending time on the lake, spending time in the garden, and thinking about how formative those years were for me and how I feel about nature, but also what a sort of protective barrier they gave me when times got really hard. So actually, what I'm interested in studying after I'm done with a PhD is how nature can be sort of a protective factor against trauma and experiences that have to do with trauma. So Yeah, looking back on my childhood and seeing the kids here, I mean, I loved bugs, I loved mud, I love all of those things as a kid. So it was really fun to sort of see how kids feel. And turns out not every kid loves bugs and mud, which is crazy, but some actually were like, oh, I don't like that. So that was also really interesting to see.
So I was thinking about like your graph with this, like, is that like this, are the parents like my child is from average kind of is that kind of one way to interpret it?
Yes.
I'm sort of thinking that the children might be more accurate than the parents.
Well, so yes, I think that's a very good question and point. Let's see. So, whoopsie, sorry. We are going way back. I'm just going to stop touching it and let it do what it needs to do for a second. So I think that's a really good point. At first, that was my thought is, yes, we should always trust the children. We should always like take sort of their word. But the truth is also that children's emotions and thoughts change so fast at this age. So this was 4- and 5-year-olds. So they might feel one way in one moment and then a completely different way in the next moment. So there is a chance that parents who see their children over long periods of time are better able to comment like, overall, my child sort of feels this way about nature. But how skewed this is could also be an indication that in Iceland, maybe parents are like, yes, of course, my child loves nature, respects nature, does everything that they should be doing with nature. That could also be the case. So I think that doing this study in another country, like in the US, would be really exciting to sort of see if these patterns hold. And then, I think that the truth is probably somewhere in between these graphs. The children over longer periods of time, testing them, and that sort of comparing it. Yo.
So I'm thinking about being a kid and you're like inherently curious about and then at some point that curiosity sort of fades. But I feel like a lot of the things we talk about when it comes to nature today, they're very much an abstraction. Like it's hard to a concrete idea of like what global warming looks like. It's hard for a preschooler to have this like bigger perspective. So I'm just wondering, is there like a way you could maybe another potential study where you look more longitudinal, like as you get older, right? And your idea of nature goes from something that you play in the mud into something that's global. Like how do those natures change? How does your perception of nature change? And then like how do you get that end goal of sustainable behaviors?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for people online, I'm asking how people's views of nature change across the lifespan, and then what it takes to sort of from those early moments of playing in nature to those later adult sustainable behaviors. And I think that there have been studies that show this sort of direct connection between childhood nature connection and later adult sustainability. But there's also some cases where that's not the case. You could be highly connected to nature and still not be motivated to act in sustainable ways. But I think to your point about what nature is, it's really interesting to see kids draw very concretely. Like this example is a tree of a child's that's at the child's school, things that are very much in their environment. But when you ask adults this question, it's like mountains, trees, rivers, the sun. Like it's very kind of this very abstract idea. So I think though that like keeping people close to nature across the lifespan is a good opportunity to, for me, when I think of nature, I think of bees, because that's the one connection I have to a very small localized population of nature. And I think finding that, whatever that is for everybody, to keep them sort of interested and connected across the lifespan could be interesting to research in the future.
I'm afraid we have to stop. I know it's a fascinating topic, but there will be opportunities.
Okay, here we are. So now we're going to be hearing from our two scholars today, starting with Áslaug, who's a professor of political science at Bates College in Maine. Some people are puzzled when they hear Áslaug. She's a U.S. Fulbright scholar. Indeed, she's not a stranger to Iceland, having grown up here, but she has been an American citizen for many decades now, or a few, we won't say many. So we saw great value in bringing her back here to build relationships as a Fulbright research scholar. She's hosted by the University of Iceland, and I'm gonna let her tell you about her project.
Thank you so much for being here, and to everybody who's online. And thank you, Belinda, for a nice introduction. I'm going to try to I need to have my notes with, so I'm like not good otherwise. So we'll see. So So in a true political science fashion, Belinda had this long title for my project, and I've changed it. But I forgot to mention that to them, and I decided to go with a more poetic returning. And so it's returning for me in many ways. It's like I've been here. I've been here. You know, I left in '94. I'm returning to my home country, returning to my mother language, to old friends, to family, and to my research, because I was a administrator for 5 years before coming here. So it's been a lot of like returning. But first off, what I want to say is thank you all to the people who selected my application to come here, to the Fulbright Commission Iceland for just hosting us and being amazing hosts. It's made the experience of being here just so much different. And also thank you to the people who supported my application, which were Max Conrad at the Department of Political Science at the University of Iceland, Pia Hansen at the Institute for International Affairs at the University of Iceland, which is where I've been hosted at the Political Science Department. So it's been actually really, really great. So thank you all, and I hope I've done you somewhat, done something here to, show that it was a good choice. I decided to start with the photos, and in looking through my photos, I realized I'm not really a selfie taker. So compared to the younger generation, not many selfies. But as I said before, I left in 1994. I've come back often. I spent a semester here doing research during my dissertation stage, but I haven't lived here full time for decades. And so it's been really fun being back, and I've really enjoyed being back in its various ways. Where I live in the US, I live in a small town called Orman, Maine. There is a movie theater, there is a theater, there is music coming through, there is sort of much less going on. But so it's been really fun to be here in Iceland and experience all the cultural privilege. I've attended concerts, I've attended theater, I've been to I went to the book festival, saw Eric there and Peter, and just just being and enjoying being in an area that in a city that has a lot to offer. It's been wonderful reconnecting with family and friends. Some of them people say here, if you come to Iceland later in life, it's really hard to make friends because you make your friends when you're 6, 7, and 8. These are my groups of people that I met at 6, 7, 8, and they still have. And so we spent a lot of time together. I got to go to the Ettir, which is the sorting of the sheep. I'd never done that. And I got to hang out with my great niece and her little brother and sort of be part of their childhood in a more direct way than I usually am. I played tourist here. I have, really gotten a relief from having to spell my name every time I use it, which I was like, I never have to do that. I can call somebody, say, it's just Ásgeirsdóttir, and they will be, yes, yeah, how can I help you? And which is also a new thing in Iceland. People are actually much more courteous here than they used to be. They say thank you, please, and have a good day, which is kind of important, but it's kind of, I would say this is progress. And I also wanted to thank my fellow Fulbrighters, because it's an amazing group of people. And you've taught me a lot about seeing Iceland through foreign eyes. And I know some people attended ELF school that are here. I'm not going to say who, but I was just there's ELF school? What is that? Why do people do that? And so I've learned a lot about Iceland also from you guys. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to get to know you. So going forward, I'm going to talk about I've worked on sort of 2 projects here. In addition, I taught a class at the University of Iceland this fall. I taught a class called The Political Economy of the Arctic. It was at the sort of master's level. I had 6 students who always did the readings, who always showed up for class, who participated in all of the class discussions, and who were just all around fabulous. And I hadn't taught a lot for the past 5 years. And so this introduction to teaching, I was like, oh, that is really, really cool. But then I remember I teach undergraduates. I'm going to be returning to Bates to teach nothing but first years who are lovely, but they are not going to be that group. And I can see the head shaking here. So, but it was really fun to get to teach there and get to know them and sort of reconnect to that part of me. But the 2 projects I've been focusing on is one of them is sort of how Iceland has developed its Arctic policy. And I was originally also going to do another project, which was sort of how Iceland's Arctic policy, manifests itself in the Arctic Council. But when I started with the first project, there were parts of it that connected to some of my prior research, where I thought like, there's actually a lot of Arcticness there that is not visible in Iceland's Arctic policy. And so I sort of have focused on these two projects. So I'm going to start with this one. It's the development of Iceland's Arctic policy. And so it wasn't really obvious that Iceland was a founder of the Arctic, one of the founding nations of the Arctic Council in 1996. The Arctic didn't really play, it wasn't really a huge issue here, but it wasn't anywhere else either. So it's not something that Iceland is necessarily late in coming to, but it sort of was kind of like, we're there. There's a forum for cooperation. We want to be part of it. But then things happen in Icelandic foreign policy. And in 2006, we had a US naval base in Keflavik, and it leaves. It leaves somewhat suddenly. Like they had been saying, like, we're going to close this down, and then all of a sudden they did, and everybody was a bit of a shock. And when that happens, this crucial thing that was like central to Iceland's foreign policy kind of was like, wait, what do we do now? How do we refocus our attention? Where do we refocus it? And through sort of iterations, the Arctic kind of policy conversation sort of starts emerging. It's helped by two things in my mind, which is that at the same time, Iceland is sort of becoming aware that climate change is actually happening and starting to accept that as a thing. And that climate change in a country that is very resource-based is actually a big deal. And the second thing is that in 2008, the Arctic Five, the 5 nations that border the Arctic Ocean, met in Inuit in Greenland and signed a declaration about sort of basically trying not to start fishing competitively in the Arctic Ocean for a while. Iceland and Sweden and Norway, which are the other 3 Arctic states, were really, really angry at being left out, Iceland especially so. And it sort of pushed Iceland more into this, like, we need to make sure that people understand we're an Arctic state and that we should be part of the conversation. And I think these things sort of helped cement that this is actually a good way to go forward. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. The policy has been really driven by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what is interesting about it is that as it's been developing, it doesn't really matter which party is represented in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All of the foreign ministers since 2008 have sort of taken up this mantle to a different degree, but there seems to be a general agreement in Icelandic politics that this is a great way to go. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So in developing a policy, you need to figure out, like, where do we start? So you write reports, government agencies write reports. And so they start with, and when you read through the reports, there's been, several of them. There is one on shipping in the Arctic from 2005. There's another one sort of more generally, like how Iceland can benefit from the Arctic in 2009. And then there's a report, relatively recent report on how we can benefit from more cooperation with Greenland. And this all is sort of part of the process of creating an Arctic policy. And then there's 2 parliamentary resolutions, which means that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs brings this resolution to Parliament, and the parliamentarians talk about this in committee. They seek out external input, and then they vote on it to see if they're approving it. And the first policy is pretty general, and the second policy is much longer and sort of puts more meat on the bones. And that is sort of also kind of influenced by the fact that Iceland held the chairmanship of the Arctic Council in between 2019 and 2021. In thinking about I started looking at the resolutions especially because there's been a lot written about Iceland's Arctic identity, sort of the foreign policy aspect of it. There's really nothing much sort of about like how Parliament really thinks about it and if there's like debates in Parliament. And when I started looking at this, I found that there's like some peculiarities. Is that one of them is that they're all, and this is sort of similar to the reports, they're all kind of really focused on what opportunities, how Iceland can benefit from more engagement in the Arctic. There's much less about how we can be responsible stewards of the Arctic, or like how we can be sort of like the balance of cost and benefit. It is like, how can we make money from this endeavor, to be perfectly brutal. It's not said in that way, but when you read through it, but that's changed a little bit over time. There is more realization that the Arctic ice cap melting, yes, it might open up shipping routes, but it's not a universal benefit from Iceland. for Iceland. So there's sort of like all of a sudden kind of this realization that, you know. And the other thing that I find interesting, and why I started noticing this, and this isn't a surprise to me because most of my work has been on until here is Iceland as ocean governance in general, both in the North Atlantic, but also generally, is that there's really like Iceland in its narrative of being an Arctic state really puts an emphasis on we are an Arctic state, we are fully within the Arctic, and the ocean we have around us is fully in the Arctic. There really is no mention of the ocean in either of the parliamentary resolutions. And that is partially because Icelanders have never really, politics in Iceland have never really thought of fisheries politics as a foreign affairs thing. We do have cooperative agreements, sometimes not. I'm going to talk about them a little later, but it's not in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's in the Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries now. It used to be a separate ministry, and they are sort of like, it's just not really part of it, and it's not very present in these policies, which is interesting. The other thing that I found interesting as a political scientist, because we're interested in like what's the conversation and who's against and who's for. Everybody is like unanimously approving these policies in Parliament. There's not that much of a discussion. The people who comment on these policies are like, this is great, yay, go Iceland. But like everybody's like every single person who votes on this says yes. And I've been trying to figure out like, and this is where I got something like, when you're a political scientist, like you don't really expect that always. There are places in politics where this happens. And one of the things is, I think it has more benefits than cost. This is not like having an Arctic policy is not actually followed by allocating more money to this area necessarily. So you're not taking from anybody else. It's also been like, it's sort of like is making visible what Iceland is already doing at the international level, like cooperating with the Arctic Council. Be like as a small state, cooperation with others is crucial to our basically survival as a state. And it also avoids two of the most controversial issues in Icelandic politics, which is fisheries and whether or not Iceland should join the European Union. It's completely silent on these things. And so it's sort of more better that. I sort of started having conversations with a variety of people, like, why does everybody agree? I just found this so interesting. Like, why is there no conversation? I even asked a parliamentarian, like, why do you all agree? And the answer I got was like, that's an excellent question. I don't really know. And so, okay, don't know what to do with it, but it's one answer. So here are some of the answers that I've sort of come across. So it's a great question, don't know the answer. It's a balance issue, which is in political science means that voters in general think this is a good idea, but voters in Iceland, I would argue, really don't care about their policy. They care about other things. A lot of people talked about like the role of Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, Össur Skarphéðinsson. He's the former prime minister, the former president of Iceland, the former Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who started, who sort of was responsible for the first Arctic policy. There's also like people agree on this issue of that is not sort of one of the two kind of third rail mentors. And then I think it is also part of it is like this FOMO, to use a slang from texting, which is that fear of missing out. Is that it is like the Ilulissat Declaration in 2008 really was impactful in Iceland and on the Icelandic politics. In that, why did they leave us out? Like, how dare they? And so there is sort of like, I don't know how to distinguish between these. I don't know which one is the right one. They're probably, and I come from a part in political science where people want to, we want to have a theory and a question and like, and then sort of one nice answer. And I really don't have that at this point. Maybe never, who knows? But this idea, so this is sort of where this project is now. It's sort of a nice little draft thing. But this idea about the ocean and sort of like the Iceland, part of Iceland's identity is that the ocean is key to our argument that we are in the Arctic. And I've written a book about how Icelanders and Norwegians especially have collaborated over shared fishing stocks in the North Atlantic and elsewhere. And my book stopped into 1999. And so in thinking about the ocean as part of the Arctic, because not everybody does that. You think of Arctic as like territories, not oceans. I started thinking like I should go back to my old questions and old projects, because in 1999, when I stopped my research for my dissertation, everything was kind of neatly tied up. There were plenty of agreements that there were several agreements in the North Atlantic about shared fish stocks, who would get what. And one of the things that, and in 2005, since 2005, all of this has kind of collapsed. And there's really none of these very few of these agreements exist anymore. And one of the things that some of you may know is that there are sort of people who say like about 800 species of fish and invertebrates are going to move further north. We don't know exactly where, when, and how, and not all of it is in the North Atlantic. And whenever you have changes in environmental conditions like that, you have increased conflict. There is really never really an exception to that rule. And so I started thinking, like, why has there's been this sort of changing of how fish move around, and it's increased conflict here. And as a result, what is suffering is actually the fish. Even like one of Iceland's biggest and most powerful interest groups, the Association Fisheries in the industry, they even put out a report last year where they said about all of the 3 stocks that I'm going to talk about are like overfished by 30 to 40% each year now because of lack of agreement. So and so we're already seeing this play out. And here's what I'm going to say. So like I've learned when I talk about fish that not everybody understands what I'm talking about all the time. So I've been trying to be more careful. But these are the 200-mile exclusive economic zones in the Arctic and in north of Iceland. So the light blue areas, the United Nations Law of the Sea gives everybody 200 miles. There are median lines and sort of that are negotiated lines in separating when there's less than 400 miles between them. The white areas are international areas where anybody can fish catch the fish. And the particularly problematic stocks in this area have been what we call the pelagic stocks, the stocks that fish in like big groups of fish that swim together. They're easy to catch when you find them, and they bring a lot of value when fishing them. And they're mackerel, herring, blue whiting, and capelin. This is mackerel. And in the 1990s, there was a lot of consternation in the North Atlantic, especially around this international area here that looks like a horseshoe, because the herring came from northern Norway, swam into all of a sudden started swimming into international areas where it was sort of open fisheries, and then it started going into Iceland and the Faroe Islands, which meant that everybody else could also catch it, not just Norway. And so people had to figure out like how do we share it anew. But now since 2005, the really contentious stocks have been mackerel, herring, and blue whiting. And one of the things that I wanted to really start thinking about from this perspective is, it's called the pelagic complex. And they're valuable, plentiful, but also overfished. And so far, the stocks don't seem to be collapsing because of overfishing, but if we do this for another 10 years, they may. And they're pretty much all internationally migratory stocks are managed on a stock-by-stock basis. Here's mackerel, this is how much it is, this is what you get, and that's it. And what I wanted to start to think about, because there's been economists who sort of suggested that if you manage them all 3 together, it might be beneficial in the long run. But getting people in fisheries to think about the long run is a really, really difficult thing. They think in like the next season, the next year, and all of that is usually based on data from a year or 2 ago. And so they manage stock by stock basis. There's an international organization in Copenhagen called the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, one of the oldest international organizations we have. It's a scientific organization that basically gets data from everywhere and comes to agreement like this is how much fish there is, and this is how much you can catch. Then where the political disagreement is that who gets to catch what percentage of that whole. And so there's usually an agreement about how much you can, but not about who should be able to catch these fish. And these fish are fished by Norwegians, the European Union, Iceland, Faroe Islands, and Russia, primarily. There are some other also fisheries, but these are sort of the big fishing. So they have to decide amongst themselves who gets what. And that's really hard. And if you add into that, and so what I've been trying to figure out is do you try to figure out how, is if you can do this, like what are the stumbling blocks in actually trying to manage them all three together? Because they're pretty much fished by the same ships. They have different seasons, so you could rotate from one fish to the other to the third. And so they have a lot of things in common that could actually benefit this. But there are going to be stumbling blocks. And sort of just before I sort of kind of get ready to end here, is that there is general, while we sort of have an agreement on like how much stuff there is, like where and when it is in certain places, like we don't really agree on very often. Or we also, in light of climate change, where we expect these stocks to move even further and in different ways, and sometimes in unpredictable ways, is the stock movement temporary or permanent? If it's temporary, you can say like, well, these 4 states should continue fishing it, and we're not going to add the 4th one, even if they found one fish in there within their waters. And this is actually a really tricky thing to solve. And how quickly do you accept the fact that things have actually changed permanently? That's a huge argument. Like arguing about like when history starts and how it should matter is a really big argument in this circle. And then there's the role of history, is that even if you can decide where and when it is and allocate it on those bases, is that historical rights to fisheries have always been really, really strong. And so in thinking about the role of history, you have to actually emphasize, like, yes, we can have a scientific measure of when the fishes were, but you can't take it away permanently from somebody who has had a 30-year history of fishing something. And so these are sort of like the stumbling blocks going forward in trying to thinking about solving these conflicts. So this is sort of where I'm gonna end. Like, what comes next? That slide didn't make it into my my presentation, sorry. But I'm gonna be returning to Maine in the fall to start teaching again. I opted to teach nothing but first years who I've not seen in a classroom for 7 years. It's going to be a shock, but I think they're going to be lovely. And I'm going to teach a first year seminar on the Arctic, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to take sort of an interdisciplinary review of it and sort of get them to think about it from various perspectives. And then I'm going to teach an introductory course on states and markets and how they influence each other. And so that's sort of kind of the biggest thing, is like returning to the States and making sure sort of like that I'm ready for this in the fall and seeing where things take me. But it's been an invaluable year to be here, and I'm so grateful that I was able to be one of you. And I look forward to many conversations in the future. So thank you. And let me know if you have any questions.
Absolutely fascinating. We have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions. If somebody would like to go, I can see yes.
You talked at the beginning about how the impact of climate change in small countries, specifically resource-based countries, made it so Iceland the impact. Do you see this happening in larger countries in the coming years as well, or do you think it will maybe be in the smaller resource-based communities within those countries? Or do you think possibly that it won't be recognized on like a larger national level until it's too late?
I suspect we might be already there in a lot of places. I think the challenge is that, like, I think people are recognizing that we have that, you know, that it is changing. And I'm not like I like sort of big data and all that, but I've lived in Maine for 20 years, and when I moved there, I could be reliably like there would be 3 miserably hot days a summer, and now we usually have 10. So you can, if you think about it that way, there is an impact already. The Gulf of Maine is described as being the body of water that is warming up the fastest. And we know this. There's general agreement in Maine that this is happening, which has a huge impact on the biggest industry in the state, one of the biggest industries, which is lobstering. But there is no political agreement on what to do because of sort of like some people not wanting to admit this and other people like sort of, so some countries are further ahead in admitting this politically and starting to think about this and doing something. But what you do, it gets back to this, like who is going to pay and who is going to benefit. And that is a really tricky thing. There was another question in the back there.
I was wondering when Iceland was left out in the Arctic discussion, was it just that the did you think of including them, or were there arguments against Iceland being an Arctic state because of the land? Because the land is mostly below the Arctic Circle. What was the reason?
I don't think in foreign policy anything happens by accident. So the argument was that Iceland is not a literal state to the Arctic Ocean, which we are not. But the ocean in the north of the Iceland is part, touches the Arctic Ocean, and so it was a deliberate act. They thought they would get together and have an easier agreement that way. And no, I don't think there's any accident. And that argument was basically who's a literal state and who's.
Being an Arctic state?
I think it sort of kind of pushed Iceland to start really formulating its policies in a more way and make sure that everybody outside of Iceland knew that we were an Arctic state, because they felt that I think that was the missing piece. Thank you so much.
So, final speaker today, geologist Tenley Banik. And Tenley was previously a Fulbright Fellow in Iceland over a decade ago. Now she's an associate professor at Illinois State. Hosted by the Research Center of the Westfjords, and she's been up in Suðureyri. And I'm not going to go into her project. I'm going to let her do it, just to note that it is a fascinating one. And just to also note that Tenley is the star of an upcoming Fulbright video profile. So stay tuned, that will be coming out soon. I hope some of you had roles as extras in that. But for now, let's have Tenley enlighten us.
Thank you for that, Belinda. I'll quickly also mention I'm on the tail end of a cold, and so if I have a 30-second hacking fit, it's not you, it's me. I'm really sorry. I'm going to try not to do that. Also, I get to go last today, which is great because I know you've all wanted to hear about isotope geochemistry. Yeah, all right. This is kind of a sciencey oriented talk, but I'll try to throw in some anecdotes and more fun things too. But here we go. So I am a geologist, as Belinda mentioned, but I've been doing research in Iceland for a long time now. And also at the tail end of my previous Fulbright 10 years ago, I also happened to meet and fall in love with an Icelander. So I've had a really good reason to keep coming back here. In addition to my my geological interests, which are still very much based here, and I still am doing a lot of active research on volcanic systems here. But I also have, started spending time with people who are really involved in some fishy stuff. And I am kind of just a scientist by nature. And so I've started, asking a lot of questions over the years about things I don't know about, like fish. So I really wanted to take this year to ask and hopefully try to answer some of these questions. And they started out based on things that I knew about, like rock stuff. But then they quickly devolved into asking questions about water stuff and fish stuff and, all sorts of stuff. So here are those questions, right? Are there fjord scale differences in rock strontium isotope signature? And you're like, what? I'll explain everything in a minute. But this is a question that I had, and this is very much based off of work that I've been doing out in the Westfjords of Iceland for the past decade. So this was where I started. I was like, I want to know this. This would be cool. We don't really know anything about this. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I could answer that, and it would take like a month in the lab, and that would be it. And that's not a very exciting thing to do. Well, maybe I should also think about some greater part of the ecosystem there. So how do these chemical differences change in the water signature in each fjord? Like, are there differences in the rocks? Are there differences in water? Because as we'll see, there's a lot of water in the Westfjords in addition to a lot of rocks. And what lives in the water, and what's probably the most important thing to Icelanders, apart from other environmental things, is fish. The Westfjords is the only part of Iceland in which fisheries and fish-related things are still the #1 part of the economy instead of tourism. And so fish is in a large way on people's minds in some way, shape, or form. So ultimately, then what I wanted to know was, do fish in specific fjords have this different chemical signature as the waters and the rocks in those fjords do? So this is what I was trying to answer while I was out there. Who cares? I'll just put this out there right now before I talk at you for 20 minutes. You're like, oh my God, where's this going? Who cares, right? Well, obviously, I and other academic-y type people like me kind of care. We actually, the more I kind of got into this project and started doing some background research, realized that there are just a lot of unanswered sort of like basic information questions that like just nobody's done research on, and like we just don't have a good baseline for. So this type of study is good for kind of getting at some of those baseline parameters. People interested in fisheries stuff are generally interested in overall fishing stocks, as we just heard. So this type of research might go to answering like what fjords make the best cod nurseries, right? That's kind of important, right? You want to catch adult cod in 8 years, you better have some baby cod that are actually surviving their infancy, right? Cod are really cannibalistic, by the way, FYI. If you're interested in the environment, right? How might warming seas lead to changes on the fjord scale in terms of where fish are going? We just heard from Áslaug about how, you know, climate change is causing fishery stocks to start moving around, and cod is no exception. We've already started to see this, right? So on a very small scale, we see these changes happening in real time. If you're interested in regional planning, right? Where should new construction be located? There are a lot of bridges across fjords in the Westfjords, for example. If you wanted to build a new road in a place, if you wanted to have a new factory in a fjord, you might want to know, well, what is that environment like now before humans start going in there and messing stuff up potentially, right? Are we going to damage what is a primary cod habitat, and we don't even know it right now? And finally, this was brought to my attention last summer when I was meeting with a fish scientist at Háskóli Ísland. People have caught fish in Iceland for a very, very long time, and they move around. And parts of ancient fish have been found in like Viking era camps. And so this type of research actually is going to help to answer, how did past inhabitants on this island move around? What were they catching? What were they eating? How far were they transporting it? So I'll get there. Yeah, who knows, right? So anyway, we've already seen this today, but I'll put it up here again. Here's a map of Iceland. Circled in purple here are the Westfjords. My Fulbright 10 years ago was based here in Reykjavik, and that was great, but I am not a city person. I would rather live in the middle of nowhere. So I went to live in the middle of nowhere in a village called Theriault, population about 300 people. And if we zoom into the Westfjords, Theriault is the town in the green labeled Suandafjörður there on the sort of left side. And Suandafjörður was one of the 2 fjords that I did this study in. It's really easy for me to access. I know people who live there and can help out with stuff. And it's also the place where there's only a teeny tiny bit of the rock data that I was interested collected there. So I have a tiny bit of like a bit of pre-existing knowledge there. I put the village of Ísafjörður up there, so you have a reference point. We've heard that mentioned sometimes today. And my other study fjord was Álftafjörður, which is next to Ísafjörður on the other side. And I'll talk a little bit about why I selected these 2 fjords in particular from a sciencey perspective in a second here. Right? So here we go. Okay. Now, if you're thinking, how are rocks and waters and fish and everything connected? Well, we're going to get there, but also I need to introduce you to these things called otoliths, right? Otoliths, that word basically means ear stone. And all sorts of fish, but also especially cod, have these ear stones that grow in their inner ears throughout their entire lifetimes. And so when they're nice big adult cod, you can take these things out of their head, and they're really easy to find because they're like 1 inch long or 2 centimeters long, and they're nice and great. And when your cod are this long, they are really, really little. They're like 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters, and you're thinking, God, please do not let me sneeze while I'm taking this out of this thing's head, or it'll be gone forever. So these are actually the things that when I say I'm talking about, like I'm dealing with fish, these are really the things in the fish I'm dealing with. I'm not dealing with like the whole fish for the most part. And the thing about otoliths that are really cool is that they are made out of this mineral. The composition is up here: calcium, carbon, oxygen, in the form of the mineral aragonite. And calcium is everywhere. The rocks in Iceland are really chock full of calcium. Calcium dissolves in water very readily. And also in these otoliths. So that's an element that I could easily analyze in all 3 of the things I'm interested in. But what's also important here is that there is an element, here's calcium on the periodic table, here's strontium right below it. And if you remember any of your high school chemistry, you know the things in the same column in the periodic table are really chemically similar. So strontium is really chemically similar to calcium. That is ultimately the thing I really want to measure, also because some types of strontium are radioactive. So that is helpful because it helps to give a time component of what I'm looking at. All right, so there's your isotope geochemistry for the day. And well, these otoliths are growing in these fish heads, like great. Where is that stuff coming from? Well, it's ultimately coming from the water. It's not really coming from their food. It's not coming from like the type of dirt they live on top of on the seafloor. Like it's coming directly from the water. So what's in the water should also then somewhat be reflected in these otoliths. All right, so here we go. We have strontium and calcium, but calcium substitutes in for, or strontium substitutes for calcium a lot. So there we go. We've got strontium in rocks and in water and in fish. And so we're good to go, right? And of course, water here is really the connector, right? And chemistry is also a connector. But water is all over the place in the Westfjords, right? Most of the fjords have these deep incisions. This is the view from the back door of my house. You can see these nice sort of, streved carved gullies all over the place. And in the winter, when things get really cold and you just drive around, you see something like this, just frozen groundwater just oozing out of the ground everywhere, right? It's just everywhere. So here we go. We're going to be looking at some rock stuff. I'm a rock person. I started with the rock stuff. I went around, sampling rocks. It's great, right? And the thing about rocks here that also kind of makes the nerd in me was really like excited about the rock part of this study was I'm going to show some pictures of some different fjords. One to show you that I leave my home fjord sometimes, but also have a look at what you see here in Suandafjordur. Here's a nice picture from Arnafjordur. Here's a nice picture from Vatnadaler. And here's a picture from Alftafjordur. This is one of my study fjords. Let's zoom in on this back part here. All right, here's what the rocks look like there. It's a little pixelated, but anybody notice anything? There's an audience participation part of it. It's all basalt, which is the dark rock that makes up 90% of Iceland. It's all basalt. Yep. And anything else? Right. They're all kind of look like a big stack of pancakes on top of each other. Yeah, everywhere you go. And also, I like this picture particularly well because it shows something about that stack of pancakes. Right. It is not horizontal. It's actually at an angle. Yeah. Whoa. Right. So here's why that is. If we look at all of that data, all of the rocks in the Westfjords actually have a dip, like kind of toward the southeast. So that's why your stack of pancakes looks, tilted, because it is. And if we sort of draw a line between Suandafjordur and then toward Alftafjordur, right, and artist rendition here, here's what that stack of pancakes looks like. Here's Suandafjordur, right, and all the pancakes are kind of leaning down this way. They're not pancakes, they're lava flows, folks. But it's easier to say pancakes, right? And if you look at kind of where the sea level is on the Suandafjordur side, it's at sea level, it's just like totally different rock composition and just rock layers in general than what's on the Alftafjordur side, right? And if you can imagine you're like a snowflake that falls up here and kind of eventually makes your way downhill, you're flowing through kind of a different subset of the rocks than a snowflake that falls over here and makes your way through the groundwater, et cetera, right? So this is how there might actually be a difference in chemistry between these two places. When you're like, God, everything's basalt. Like, why would it be any different at all? Well, because there's an age difference here. And I mentioned that one of the things I'm measuring is radioactive. And so there's a time component. So things that are really old, like water that's flowing through really old stuff, probably has a slightly different signature than water flowing through the young stuff, because it just hasn't had enough time for that isotope to decay. So anyway, here we go. So that's sort of the motivation here. Let's bring in some fish, right? So you're like, hey, cool, rocks don't move. That's great. Water's flowing downhill into a fjord. That's great. Fish move, you idiot. Like, what are you talking about with these fish? Well, it turns out that even though fish in Iceland kind of spawn down here off the southern and western coast, right? They get caught in this Ermingar current that kind of moves clockwise around Iceland as like these little larvae stage. And then as larvae, they sort of dumped out into the various fjords along the way. And once they're there, they spend this juvenile stage from the first year of their life to like their 3 or 4 in the same fjord. Like they might move to deeper, shallower water within that fjord, but they're not out in the greater ocean. They're like staying in one place, right? So that's a good way to sample some of these juveniles that are hanging out in the same fjord for several years, right? See what their ear stones look like chemically. And I also wanted to sample some otoliths from big adult cod that have gone out and are living their best life out in the wider ocean until they're caught, and see if we can look at the very first years of their life and just see what sort of profiles we're seeing in terms of like differences, right? And these cod are going to be coming from potentially any of these fjords, maybe they're coming from here, maybe they're coming from here, right? Because they're caught halfway to Greenland. So it's a good just sort of general sample to see what we're seeing in terms of where fish are coming from. All right, so here are my obligatory pictures. Yeah, I don't know, otolith sampling. I am lucky enough that my partner works at a fish head drying factory, and so I have like basically unlimited access to fish heads, which is great because I don't actually have to kill any fish for that part of the study, right? They're already dead, and they're already, you know, the rest of them is halfway to France for dinner or something, you know. So I get to go and extract a whole lot of otoliths there. I was able to do all the otolith like preparation and stuff like that for analysis here at the University of Iceland. I went out and sampled water and sampled rocks and spent a lot of time in the clean chemistry lab here at the university trying to prepare those waters and rocks for analysis because the concentrations of the things that I'm measuring are really, really low and there aren't that many of them. And so it takes a lot of preparation to distill rock down to something that you can separate out different isotopes. Right? So anyway, and I should also mention, none of this work would have been possible without help from a lot of people. And I will mention all of them at the end. This has been a community involvement project. I've got kids from town who are really interested in this and they're going out and, you know, how can they help catch fish and like deal with that type of stuff. This is my partner and his uncle helping with boat stuff. We're putting out a temperature sensor buoy there. I do not know how to tie knots, people. These guys do. So, you know, among many other things. I've got some guys at the factory, if this video works. Ooh, yeah. Help and hold the fish so I can take otoliths out of it. Turns out the best way to get these heads open is also with a saw. So, yeah. It took me a few hard tries of getting these things out before somebody's like, wait, better idea. Here we go. Here you go. You take them out. No problem. You know, so, great. Okay. What have we learned after all of this running around sampling and things like that? Well, it turns out that the machine to analyze my rock samples is broken. It broke the day they were supposed to analyze my samples. So these are all my little sample vials. They're sitting next to the machine here at Ásgeirsdóttir, ready to go. Just waiting for that to get fixed. So, you know, that's a thing. Anyway, that's a bummer. What about water? I have data. The machine was not broken when I collected these things, right? So what do we have, right? We don't know about rocks. Talk about water. So in this diagram is our strontium isotope composition here on the left. And on the bottom here is longitude. This is just a west over on the far side. That's Suðurfjörður, and east over here, that's Álftafjörður. Suðurfjörður is also in red. Álftafjörður is in blue. I put sort of the global ocean line for this strontium isotope number up here. Globally, this number, like this is really well mixed. You can probably go to like India or Australia or, you know, stand on the North Pole, and this number will be like pretty similar everywhere you go. Right? So what do we have? Well, is there a difference between fjords? What do you guys think? Yeah, I think yeah too, right? In Suðurfjörður, these numbers are lower. These are from all my river sampling. There are little error bars here. Some of them are big enough to see. Some of them are so small that the symbol is just bigger. So these are like very precise measurements, right? So there's definitely a difference between Suðurfjörður and Álftafjörður, which is pretty cool. I was really excited when I saw this. I was like, oh my God, I wasn't totally wasting my time. And I also, in addition to measuring like the fresh water that was coming out, I also just measured the fjords themselves. And so these are sort of the open circles here and here. And what's interesting is that they're slightly different from each other. They're different from the global ocean, which is surprising because you think the ocean is so big. And there's a tide system here. It's about 2 meters every day. Water comes in, water goes out. These are, you know, large volume systems. There can be no way that, you know, there should be any difference. Well, apparently there is. Anyway, what's interesting though is that the freshwater is lower than the global ocean. And I guess if there was some sort of mixing, I would have expected our fjord value to be somewhere here between global ocean and what the rivers were telling you. And it's not. I don't know how to explain that. Also, if I had to make a prediction about what the rock signature would be, it would be down here by the Fulbright Iceland sign that's on the wall. So I really don't know what to make of this. And I'm really excited to get some more data to figure out what's going on here. well, what about those fish that I spend so much time talking about? Here's what some of my big otoliths look like. This takes a lot of work to get to this point. And I appreciate Einar for letting me turn our garage into a weird sort of laboratory for a while. But these are what these things look like, and you can kind of see that they're bright sort of lines in here. And that is, I mean, these lines are laid down on like basically a daily level, but the really big differences here are yearly. So I kind of put up here some growth lines. I actually missed them here. So like, this is when they're babies. This is like first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year. So this guy was probably like 7 or 8 years old when it was ultimately caught, right? So for these, right, I'm interested in what was the environment like when they were little. So I'm going to be analyzing kind of this area here right outside the core when they're like a year or two old. And I'm actually going to do those analyses in 2 weeks. I have to go to America for those. You need a special instrument with a laser attached to it. And anyway, and so I will have some fish data for you in a couple weeks if you want to check back on Facebook or something like that. Right? Again, here's just an inverse image of that, makes it a little bit easier to see. Right? And for my baby fish otoliths, this is actually not one of them. They're so small that I would have looked like I was showing you a white dot, which is boring. What I am showing you is an otolith of a big fish, but for whatever reason, after the first year of its life, its otolith chemistry changed. And so the mineral it was laying down is actually something called Bedrock, which is a chemical variant of the regular aragonite. And so this is basically left over from its juvenile phase. And in juvenile otoliths, like this is basically what I'm looking at. And I'm going to just, analyze right there, something like that. So that is, again, coming up next, right? And here's the type of thing you can get out of this type of analysis. So this is not my work, this is somebody else's work, right? But if you do a transect from sort of, early life all the way out to end of life, right? This is an example of where fish goes in the sea around Denmark and Sweden, for example. And you can actually kind of see over a fish's life, like where they're going, right? And especially for fish around Iceland, like this would be really cool to see, like at what age are fish usually leaving the fjord environment and going out to the ocean environment? Are they ever coming back near shore for like extended periods of time, or are they just hanging out in the ocean all the time? All right, this would be a fun thing to check out. So research questions again, where are we at with these? Waiting for data on rocks, so get back to you on that. We've completed the second part, that's great. Yes, there is a difference in the strontium isotopes. Why? I have no idea. They weren't what I would have predicted. That's okay. And in terms of looking at what's going on with fish, I have a student who's going to be looking at this first question. I've been monitoring temperature in my fjords also this whole time. And I want to see if that student can pick out how the strontium calcium ratio, which has been shown to be temperature dependent, is actually changing on like a fjord scale over a year. Right? And I'm waiting for data on this last part too. Is it possible to discern the home fjord signature from a juvenile? Right? So data coming on that. I've got lots of follow-up projects. I tend to ask like scientific questions about pretty much everything. I've gotten at least 2 from hearing everybody else's talks today, so thanks for that. But yeah, I'm really just interested in learning more about lots of stuff, right? For example, let's look at other fish species, right? Do their otoliths sort of match whatever the cod otoliths say is in terms of like a home fjord signature or not, right? There are a lot of aquaculture companies out in the area. There's one that has fish pens in Alftafjörður right now. And I was hoping in the fall to be able to get some of their fish heads from fish that they killed, but it turns out when the guy went to the freezer to get them out, they were gone. So that was a bummer. Maybe in a few years when those pens are restocked. Is it possible that different species in the same fjord might have a signature or not? Right? How do fjord volume and tide affect water mixing and the signature? That's something I really want to get more into. Do these fjord scale differences in water translate to other places in Iceland, right? These are just 2 fjords. There are lots of fjords here, right? Is there actually a variation in strontium isotope signature around in the North Atlantic? I couldn't find any North Atlantic specific values for this number, which is a little bit weird. So maybe there's a bit of a difference, who knows? Seasonal precipitation, I could go nuts, but I won't. But I will end by saying thank you to all of the people that have helped to make this possible. My partner in science and in life, Einar, Goodney, Yoi, Daniel Vego, they all are somehow associated also with the company Clothfinger that helped to supply the fish heads, among other things, along with Adam and Yatsik, who were the ones you saw sawing in the video. A PhD student up at the research center of the Westfjords, Michelle Valiant, has been super duper helpful in answering questions and like hooking me up with various fishing apparatus. Hjelte Carlson, who works at the Havre office in Isefjordur, has also been helpful getting like water sampling stuff. And Gudbjörg was my like research mentor through this whole process. So all those people in the Westfjords were super helpful. On the Reykjavik end of things, Simi and Steve at University of Iceland have been also just very helpful. All of these people I'm like randomly shooting emails to, and everybody's like, yes, I will help you. And it is so awesome. I knew Simi before, but our collaboration has definitely like expanded a lot, which is great. All the people in the geochemistry lab here, especially Romain, who was great taking my samples off the hot plate when I wasn't here, etc. Yeah. And in the US, also, people I have randomly emailed about otolith stuff because I did not know anything about this, right? So anyway, all of these folks, thank you very much. And I probably have exceeded my time. Tack för mig.
Thanks so much. And I think I was like, questions, Meghan?
Yeah, so this is great. I agree. Then, 2 questions. One really quick one. What are like actual purposes of fish? Out of curiosity. And as someone who may consider coming back again as a scholar, sort of what was the inspiration for that? And I guess just like what has shifted in your experience from being a student to being a scholar here?
Yeah, good question. So the first one is definitely easier. Otoliths and fish function like our inner ear bones. They really help orient the fish in the water, like understanding which way is up or down, and also providing balance things so the fish isn't like swimming around like going back and forth like this. So that's what they do. And in terms of like my experience here, see if I can remember all of the parts of your question, but I think Eric said this best earlier when the Fulbright gave me time, right? I am an associate professor. That doesn't mean I'm an actual professor. It's like the second level of professoring. Anyway, doesn't matter. I usually run around like a crazy person when I'm in America and I'm doing 20 different things in a day. And I ended up still doing that here, but it was like in a different way. And as I said, I come here a lot for personal reasons, and I also come here a lot for like other scholarly reasons. It was nice just to be here and not always being worried about like, when are you going next? Because usually when I show up, it's in the summer or something like that, and people are like, oh, hi, great, good to see you. When are you leaving? And it was great not to have to, or just say like, oh, sometime, but not imminently. And that was just really great. It was great to be here and experience things that I don't normally get to be here for. Like I got to do the sheep roundup this year, and that was really great. Also, if anybody works for Arcturix, we need to talk because your products did not work as advertised and keeping me dry. So just things like that, right? Like I had the ability to go to a Theriault for the first time in how many years, just because I was here, and I mean, not usually here at the end of February, right? And so that type of thing was just really great. And it was great just to have the time to go to some of these people's offices like 2 or 3 times and just kind of wait for them to show up. But normally I don't have the luxury of doing that. Yeah. And in terms of like being a student to being a scholar, I mean, I don't know, it was really similar. And honestly, my days as a student Fulbrighter were also super helpful, even now as a scholar. I have had a friend from my previous Fulbright staying with us the last few days. That friend actually introduced me in Einar. And I'm going to stay with another friend from that same time in New York on Friday night. Yeah. Yeah. And so like I've like, maintained some of these friendships from 10 years ago, and it's been really great. And like you people are all really great. And I'm sorry I haven't been around here more to like, deepen that, but yeah.
So the other is, so you might get like some different proposition. Do you think that at any point somebody, usually you don't want to do that, who knows? Would be like do you think the water and the chemical composition will impacts the actual growth of the fish or
No.
like nothing?
These are such tiny differences that they are not affecting the fish. They're not affecting what the fish eats or its life experience or its life duration or any of that. This is purely a way to sort of fingerprint the environments that the fish has been in during its lifetime. That's it. The fish itself has it has no bearing on the fish's experience.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
There you go.
Oh my goodness. Just extra slides. Oops. Let's get to, oh, there we are, last slide. Yes, again, just showing. So let's just give everybody one last round of applause who presented today. We're at the end of the program, and I think everybody who participated and attended, either in person or online, I certainly hope and I think that you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I certainly will leave feeling inspired by these people and thankful for the Fulbright program, which allows them, Americans to come here and enrich our society and Icelanders to go to the US and do the same thing. Again, thank you to all of you who presented. You guys did a tremendous job. You've made us proud. I never doubted that you would, but still just, it's as I say, this is a favorite event and it's just always so great to see the final products, but also just the personal growth, the developments and the perspectives that you guys have gained from being here. Some of you are leaving soon, some of you are staying on, but regardless, we intend and certainly hope to stay in touch with all of you. You're now, of course, in the Fulbright Iceland Alumni Club, or will be soon at the end of this month at least, and as well, of course, as all people who have spent time here become Íslandsvinir. If you've heard that expression, so you'll be in that club as well. And I hope you're going to be proud to call yourselves alumni of Fulbright Iceland, not just a Fulbright, but a Fulbright Iceland, because remember, in the end, it was Fulbright Iceland that chose you. Yes, the US did like a first, but then we got lots of applications. You were chosen by the board and the board members, some of them who are here today. And I hope that we have built a lasting bond with all of you, and that you work with us in the future and let us know what's going on in your lives. Let us know when exciting things are happening. We always love to hear from our alumni. And you guys are our most valuable asset. We want to be able to showcase you and your accomplishments, because that's really the reason for the commission being here. So this was our final presentation event of the 22-23 academic year. I want to thank everybody who tuned in or who attended, and we look forward to connecting with everybody in the fall. Those who are here in person can now come and enjoy a nice celebratory drink with us. Those who are online will just have to go to their fridge. But for now, over and out from Fulbright Iceland. Bye-bye.